Bwindi Impenetrable National Park is located in the southwestern part of Uganda on the rim of the Rift Valley. The hillsides, which are mist-covered, are sheltered by one of the ancient and very biologically varied rainforests in Uganda that dates back to more than 25,000 years, comprising of about 400 varied plant species. More notably, this impenetrable forest in addition protects an predictable 320 population of mountain gorillas, approximately half of the population in the world, among which are a number of habituated groups, that can be tracked by visitors.Bwindi is habitat to more than half the world's population of mountain gorillas. Actually, there are over 300 mountain gorillas living here. Gorilla devotees for Uganda tours from different corners of the world to enjoy this ultimate safari in Uganda, mountain gorilla tours/tracking in Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. The word Bwindi means darkness, and taking a hike this magnificent forest will certainly unveil to you the reason why the forest was named so. You will as well be in position to fast tell why actually the forest is also regarded as impenetrable. One requires to be realistically physically fit to take part in this mountain gorilla tracking/trekking adventure because it may involve climbing the steep terrain. In addition to the endangered impressive mountain gorillas, there are also 346 bird species and more than 200 butterfly species, about 324 species of trees, 10 of which are only found in this area in the whole of Uganda. This is really a destination to explore. Because there are few habituated gorillas living here, gorillas that have been trained to withstand human presence and not likely to attack, actually the time offered to see them is limited, and so are the permits, which currently are offered at a cost of $500 per individual. No person ever complains after spending some time with these very fascinating mountain gorillas in Uganda within Bwindi Impenetrable Forest, which is among the most stunning rainforest anyone will ever come across. The Bwindi Impenetrable National Park is a national park in southwestern Uganda. It is part of the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest and is situated along the Democratic Republic of the Congo border next to the Virunga National Park and on the edge of the Albertine Rift. Composed of 321 square kilometers, 124 square miles of both montane and lowland forest, it is accessible only on foot. It is a United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization designated World Heritage Site. Species diversity is a feature of the park. It provides habitat for 120 species of mammals, 350 species of birds, 310 species of butterflies, 27 species of frogs, chameleons, geckos, and many endangered species. Floristically, the park is among the most diverse forests in East Africa, with more than 1,000 flowering plant species, including 200 species of trees and 104 species of ferns. The northern, low-elevation, sector has many species of Guineocongolian flora, including 2 endangered species, the brown mahogany and Brassylongipeda cellida. In particular, the area shares in the high levels of endemisms of the Albertine Rift. The park is a sanctuary for colobus monkeys, chimpanzees, and many birds such as hornbills and turacos. It is most notable for the 400 Bwindi gorillas, half of the world's population of the endangered mountain gorillas. 14 mountain gorilla groups live in 4 different sectors of Boma, Ruaja, Rushaga, and the Nkuringo in the districts of Kanungu, Kabul and Kisaro respectively, all under the management of Uganda Wildlife Authority. In 1932, 2 blocks of the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest were designated as Crown Forest Reserves. The northern block was designated as the Kayanza Crown Forest Reserve, and the southern block designated as the Kasatura Crown Forest Reserve. These reserves had a combined area of 207 square kilometers, 80 square miles. In 1942, the 2 reserves were combined and enlarged, then renamed the Impenetrable Central Crown Forest. This new protected area covered 298 square kilometers, 115 square miles, and was under the joint control of the Ugandan government's Game and Forest departments. In 1964, the reserve was designated as an animal sanctuary to provide extra protection for its mountain gorillas and renamed the Impenetrable Central Forest Reserve. In 1966,
Two other forest reserves became part of the main reserve, increasing its area to almost 321 square kilometers, 124 square miles. The park continued to be managed as both a game sanctuary and forest reserve. In 1991, the Impenetrable Central Forest Reserve, along with the Mgahinga Gorilla Reserve and the Ruwenzori Mountains Reserve, was designated as a national park and renamed the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. It covered an area of 330.8 square kilometers, 127.7 square miles. The national park was declared in part to protect a range of species within it, most notably the mountain gorilla. The reclassification of the park had a large impact on the Batwe Pygmy people, who were evicted from the forest and no longer permitted to enter the park or access its resources. Gorilla tracking became a tourist activity in April 1993, and the park became a popular tourist destination. In 1994, a 10 square kilometer, 3.9 square miles, area was incorporated into the park and it was inscribed on the World Heritage List. The park's management changed when Uganda National Parks, since renamed the Uganda Wildlife Authority, became responsible for the park. In 2003, a piece of land next to the park with an area of 4.2 square kilometers, 1.6 square miles, was purchased and incorporated into the park. In March 1999, a force of 100 to 150 former Rwandan Interahamwe guerrillas infiltrated across the border from the DRC and kidnapped 14 foreign tourists and their Ugandan guide from the park headquarters, eventually releasing 6 and murdering the remaining 8 with machetes and clubs. Several victims were reportedly tortured, and at least one of the female victims was raped. The Ugandan guide was doused with gasoline and lit on fire. The Interahamwe attack was reportedly intended to destabilize Uganda and frighten away tourist traffic from the park, depriving the Ugandan government of income. The park was forced to close for several months, and the popularity of the gorilla tours suffered badly for several years, though attendance has since recovered due to greater stability in the area. An armed guard also now accompanies every tour group. Kabul town to the southeast is the nearest main town to the park, 29 kilometers, 18 miles, away by road. The park is composed of 2 blocks of forest that are connected by a corridor of forest. The shape of the park is a legacy of previous conservation management, when the original 2 forest blocks were protected in 1932. There is agricultural land where there were previously trees directly outside the park's borders. Cultivation in this area is intense. The park's underlying geology consists of Precambrian shale phyllite, quartz, quartzite, schist, and granite. The park is at the edge of the Western Rift Valley in the highest parts of the Kagezi Highlands, which were created by upwarping of the Western Rift Valley. Its topography is very rugged, with narrow valleys intersected by rivers and steep hills. Elevations in the park range from 1,190 to 2,607 meters, 3,904 to 8,553 feet, above sea level, and 60% of the park has an elevation of over 2,000 meters, 6,600 feet. The highest elevation is Ruamunyonyi Hill at the eastern edge of the park. The lowest part of the park is at its most northern tip. The forest is an important water catchment area. With a generally impermeable underlying geology where water mostly flows through large fault structures, water infiltration and aquifers are limited. Much of the park's rainfall forms streams, and the forest has a dense network of streams. The forest is the source of many rivers that flow to the north, west, and south. Major rivers that rise in the park include the Ivi, Munyaga, Ihizo, Ishisha, and Antangira rivers, which flow into Lake Edward. Other rivers flow into Lakes Mutanda and Bunyonyi. Bwindi supplies water to local agricultural areas. Bwindi has a tropical climate. Annual mean temperature ranges from a minimum of 7 to 15 degrees Celsius, 45 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, to a maximum of 20 to 27 degrees Celsius, 68 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit. Its annual rainfall ranges from 1,400 to 1,900 millimeters, 55 to 75 in. Peak rainfall occurs from March to April and from September to November. The park's forest plays an important role in regulating the surrounding area's environment and climate. High amounts of evapotranspiration from the forest's vegetation increase the precipitation that the region outside the park receives. It also lessens soil erosion, a serious problem in southwestern Uganda. It lessens flooding and ensures that streams continue to flow in the dry season. The Bwindi Impenetrable Forest is old, complex, and biologically rich. Diverse species are a feature of the park, and it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site because of its ecological importance. Among East African forests, Bwindi has some of the richest populations of trees, small mammals, birds, reptiles, butterflies, and moths. The park's diverse species are partly a result of the large variations of elevation and habitat types in the park, and may also be because the forest was a refuge for species during glaciations in the Pleistocene epoch. The park's forests are afromontane, which is a rare vegetation type on the African continent. Located where plain and mountain forests meet, there is a continuum of low-altitude to high-altitude primary forests in the park, one of the few large tracts of East African forest where this occurs. The park has more than 220 tree species, and more than 50% of Uganda's tree species, and more than 100 fern species. The brown mahogany is a threatened plant species in the park. Bwindi Impenetrable National Park is important for the conservation of the afromontane fauna, especially species endemic to the western Rift Valley's mountains. It is thought to have one of the richest faunal communities in East Africa, including more than 350 bird species and more than 200 butterfly species. There are an estimated 120 mammal species in the park, of which 10 are primates, and more than 45 are small mammals. Along with mountain gorilla, species in the park include common chimpanzee, L-Hoest's monkey, African elephant, African green broadbill, and cream-banded swallowtail, black and white colobus, red-tailed monkeys, vervets, the giant forest hog. The fish species in the park's rivers and streams are not well known. The park is inhabited by about 459 individual mountain gorillas American Samoa per the last 2019 gorilla census. Gorilla Fund, Gorilla Bwindi, known as the Bwindi population, which makes up almost half of all the mountain gorillas in the world. The rest of the worldwide mountain gorilla population lives in the nearby Virunga Mountains. A 2006 census of the mountain gorilla population in the park showed that its numbers had increased modestly from an estimated 300 individuals in 1997 to 320 individuals in 2002 to 340 individuals in 2006, and 400 in 2018. Poaching, disease and habitat loss are the greatest threat to the gorillas. Research on the Bwindi population lags behind that of the Virunga National Park population, but some preliminary research on the Bwindi gorilla population has been carried out by Craig Stanford. This research has shown that the Bwindi gorilla's diet is markedly higher in fruit than that of the Virunga population, and that the Bwindi gorillas, even silverbacks, are more likely to climb trees to feed on foliage, fruits, and epiphytes. In some months, the Bwindi gorilla diet is very similar to that of Bwindi chimpanzees. It was also found that Bwindi gorillas travel farther per day than Virunga gorillas, particularly on days when feeding primarily on fruit than when they are feeding on fibrous foods. Additionally, Bwindi gorillas are much more likely to build their nests in trees, nearly always in Alchirnea floribunda, locally, Ikizagwe, a small understory tree. The mountain gorilla is an endangered species, with an estimated total population of about 650 individuals. There are no mountain gorillas in captivity, but during the 1960s and 1970s, some were captured to start captive breeding. The park is owned by the Uganda Wildlife Authority, a parastatal government body. The park has total protection, although communities adjacent to the park can access some of its resources. The areas bordering the park have a high population density of over 300 inhabitants per square kilometer, 780 inhabitants per square mile. Some of the people who live in these areas are among the poorest people in Uganda. The high population and poor agricultural practices place great pressure on the Bwindi forest, and are one of the biggest threats to the park. 90% of the people are dependent on subsistence agriculture, as agriculture is one of the area's few ways of earning income. Prior to Bwindi's gazetting as a national park in 1991, the park was designated as a forest reserve, and regulations about the right to access the forest were more liberal and seldom enforced. Local people hunted, mined, logged, pit-sawed, and kept bees in the park. It was gazetted as a national park in 1991 because of its rich biodiversity and threats to the integrity of the forest. Its designation as a national park gave the park higher protection status. State agencies increased protection and control of the park. Adjacent communities' access to the forest immediately ended. This closing of access caused large amounts of resentment and conflict among these local communities and park authorities. The Badwe, an ethnic group that had relied on the forest, were badly affected. The Badwe fished, harvested wild yams and honey, and had ancestral sites within the park. Despite the Badwe people's historical claim to land rights and having lived in the area for generations without destroying the area's ecosystem, they did not benefit from any national compensation scheme when they were evicted. Non-Badwe farmers who had cut down the forested areas in order to cultivate them, received compensation and their land rights were recognized. People have lost livestock and crops from wildlife, and there have been some human deaths. The habituation of gorillas to humans in order to facilitate tourism may have increased the damage they do to local people's property because their fear of people has decreased. Bwindi Impenetrable National Park, covering 32,092 ha, is one of the largest areas in East Africa which still has Afromontane lowland forest extending to well within the montane forest belt. Located on the eastern edge of the Albertine Rift Valley and believed to be a Pleistocene refugium, the property is a biodiversity hotspot with possibly the greatest number of tree species for its altitude in East Africa. It is also host to a rich fauna including a number of endemic butterflies and one of the richest mammalian assemblages in Africa. Home to almost half of the world's mountain gorilla population, the property represents a conservation frontline as an isolated forest of outstanding biological richness surrounded by an agricultural landscape supporting one of the highest rural population densities in tropical Africa. Community benefits arising from the mountain gorilla and other ecotourism may be the only hope for the future conservation of this unique site. Thank you for watching this video.